So hello everyone, my name is Bredesen Wheeler. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator at Women's Advocates.
And I'm Mary Beth Becker-Loth. My pronouns are also she, hers, and I'm the Crisis Resource and Outreach Navigator at Women's Advocates.
Wonderful. I forgot to add how I'm currently feeling. I am currently feeling a little tired, but excited. That's 2 words, sorry.
I will also say excited, Bredesen. I have had a lot of coffee this morning. I am ready to go. Let's do this.
And your monstera behind you, your plant is blue.
Thank you. She's flourishing.
Wonderful. Hopefully we can all think about how we're growing and nurturing ourselves as well too. Okay, so thinking about growing and nurturing ourselves, this visual is a really great reminder to take care of yourself. So we normally include kind of content warnings before all of our webinars, just to remind people we know you read the description and that you're here, but we also want to remind people that it's not uncommon for people who attend our webinars to have trauma responses to webinar content that is discussing domestic violence or anything else related to that too. Sometimes things can sneak up on us and we need to tend to our own mental health for whatever reason. This week especially, I did want to name there's a lot going on, and especially if you're kind of have your headlines on for your news, I'm sure that you're kind of up to date, and whatever responses you're having to that information in the community and in our country, being the United States, and that we do have some folks joining us from outside the United States, but just another invitation extended to take care of yourself as you need today, always, but especially when you're in the space thinking about some things that are really tough. We're going to be talking about some really tough things today. So if there's any, you need support or grounding for any reason, please do what you need to, and we're here to debrief with you or connect with you afterward if needed. So we encourage you to tend to all of those needs. So emotional, physical, holistic, safety, security, and just, feeling connected to what you need and listening to your body throughout this. So thank you for being here, and we hope that you are able to take care of yourself. Anything you want to add to that, Mary Beth?
I will say all violence is interconnected. Audre Lorde said, "I am not free so long as any woman is unfree, even if her shackles look different from my own." Our program needs to operate in solidarity with all women everywhere, regardless of race, socioeconomic background, sexual orientation. We are here for women. And my heart is very much in Atlanta right now.
Thank you for sharing that, Mary Beth. And on that note, we do have some resources on the screen too, if you do find that you would like some extra support or someone to talk to. This is a resource for you as well too, so feel free to take a picture of it if you'd like, or kind of jot the names down if you don't know them already. Okay, so a little bit kind of pivoting, shifting gears to the webinar content. These are the kind of learning objectives, kind of things that we talked about in the registration of what to expect from the next 90 minutes. Again, we encourage you all to engage with us, have this kind of be a conversation. We'd love to have that included, but we are going to be discussing domestic violence, specifically the form of social abuse within the context of the pandemic. And it is a type of abuse that I think is not focused on as much, or a lot of education isn't as available about this specific form. Sometimes it's framed as just a tactic, which it is definitely a tactic in a greater, larger system of power and control, but it is something that is utilized in that power and control dynamic. So we're going to talk about that and then kind of leave on a note of how we can connect, right? How connection can be the antidote for isolation. And we're going to talk about kind of the difference between isolation and loneliness. So that's just a little bit of what's ahead. So kind of starting with what is domestic violence and just reading through the chat, I see a lot of you are advocates, so I probably don't have to define this for you, but just letting you know that we're operating from domestic violence being this pattern of power and control, this systematic, intentional choice to use all of these different behaviors on the screen, whether it's isolation, emotional abuse, controlling finances, physical, sexual assault, intellectual abuse, lots of different ways to gain power and control over another person within the context of a dating, that could be former or current dating, um, or spousal relationship, family relationship context, or even household relationship context as well too. So people that you are living with, which I think is especially relevant for this conversation too, that abuse has that intimate connection, but is not just between two people who are married or two people who are dating. So keeping that in mind as we move forward, and that, as I mentioned, there are a lot of different forms of abuse. And so these are some that we've talked about in our previous webinars, hopefully some others that we'll talk about in future webinars too. But you'll see social has a little star. That's the one we're focusing on today. But we do want to remind people that these different forms of abuse are often coupled with a lot of other forms too, that it's often not just one, and it definitely can be and is completely valid as if that is just the tactic that that abusive person has chosen to focus on. But we do want to kind of contextualize it within the realm of all of these other forms as well too. So when you get the PowerPoint slides, you'll be able to click on each of these boxes and navigate to others. If you do see any on the screen that you're curious about or haven't heard of before or want to learn more about. And so we encourage you to do that if you'd like to. Okay, so getting into kind of tying domestic violence in with COVID-19, I'll kind of let Mary Beth take that away with this equation that she
Yes. So the pandemic has been, obviously, we've been dealing with this for about a year now, a little bit more maybe if you live in the Western states or overseas. And it has sort of laid bare the underlying structures of inequality that have already existed, and just made those come out into the open. So with COVID, the physical distancing, the social distancing policies that most state governments have enacted to keep people apart from each other to reduce the risk of transmission, coupled with the dramatic rise in unemployment because of all of the businesses that are shut down, means that more people are trapped at home, or more people are stuck at home, which means that victims, survivors of domestic violence are quarantined or stuck at home with their abusive partners more often. If you've been laid off from your job, which was your only break to go outside the home and be away from the abusive environment, you're stuck at home now. You don't have that break from the abuse that you would under non-COVID circumstances. And then being trapped at home with an abusive person is its own kind of stress, obviously, its own kind of trauma. But you also have to add to that now the extreme stress and scarcity of living in a pandemic. The fears about finances, the fears about virus transmission, the potential grief and loss that people might be experiencing if they know someone who has died of COVID. All of those external stressors and the scarcity of, I don't have a job, where's my next meal coming from, where's my next paycheck coming from, all of those stressors combined with the isolation of being stuck at home with an abusive person leads to an increased vulnerability in survivors. Survivors are left increasingly vulnerable to coercive control and violence because they used to have very few resources for leaving and for getting help. And now with COVID, those resources are even fewer. So that's sort of the equation that we've got going on here. Increased isolation, increased scarcity, bad time. That's pretty much the gist of it.
Yeah, so continuing to talk about the kind of a lot of questions that we've been getting are about, okay, are numbers increasing? Are things decreasing? There has been more media attention than I would say before the pandemic about what about people who are not safe at home and how are they doing and how can we support them and what does that look like? And so we did pull some data. And again, it's still pretty new, so there hasn't been a ton of research and kind of data available for this, but this is from the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and just between the months of March and May, so March 16 to May 16 of last year. So that doesn't really encompass where we are now in March 2021, but just to give some context of like the beginning, or rather like the kind of height of when it came into our conscious awareness of what was going on, that we were experiencing a pandemic. And so the national hotline pulled together this information you see on the screen of the percentage of the certain age ranges of people who reached out. They did see a 9% increase in total contacts received. I know on a local level, there were reports of the first weekend of stay at home in Minnesota. In Ramsey County, 2/3 of the police calls were related to domestic violence. And so there have been, it's a lot of different articles I read too. It says it kind of depends on the area, so right, so everything's kind of local, but this is on a national level. So there was that 9% increase, and that there were quite a few, 6,210 to be specific, contacts that did cite COVID-19 as part of their experience. So we do know that it is influencing the abuse that they're experiencing. And so the types of abuse, and this is kind of reflective of, in general, how prevalent different forms are. And so we do know that emotional and verbal abuse, those are the most prevalent forms in terms of most commonly reported and experienced among victim survivors of all genders, of what they're experiencing. And then you'll also see 24% economic and financial abuse, which I think Mary Beth kind of set the stage for that too, of how that can be especially weaponized during this time. And then digital and also sexual as well too. So you can kind of see those stats, and then kind of some qualitative data to support that of what the specific instances that these responders to these contacts on the National Domestic Violence Hotline are finding of, things to do with legal systems, where early on, now I know there's a lot of virtual court happening and they're finding ways to make it work, but early on in March and through May of last year, there were a lot of people who couldn't file paperwork to either remove the abuser from their home or get an order for protection. And that's something that victim survivors are often told a lot of, oh, just do this and your problems will be solved. And they're like, well, there are barriers to doing that, and especially during COVID. And so there's also this escalation of abuse. So a lot of people are saying, oh, is COVID-19, is it causing abuse? And we know that this doesn't cause someone to be abusive, but the conditions that we'll talk about later of the isolation and loneliness and everything can be correlated, right, with this escalation. So there often was already abusive dynamics in place before the pandemic happened. And once all the different parameters regarding the pandemic were in place, it offered another opportunity for abusive people to kind of lean on isolation tactics and different things too, or maybe they're saying, oh, it used to be something where it was less frequent, maybe the frequency is increasing because there's more opportunities. And I hate using the word opportunity because that's normally used in a very positive context and connotation, but for abuse to occur, right? And so escalation in terms of isolation, keeping them from contact, contacting family, or threatening the survivor with deportation, or stories of maybe having someone where they've never been physically violent before, and now it's escalated to that point. And so things like the third statement here of there's red flags, but things are escalating, and now they can't seek mental health support that they would have had before or that they would have wanted in the same way. And then also, we're going to talk about this a lot more too, of using the virus, right, as a scare tactic to keep the survivor away from their kids, or again, from other people too. And so we'll dive into that more as well, but I just wanted to kind of highlight that to contextualize the pandemic and also how that's been impacting domestic violence, because we get a lot of questions about that. So we do have a poll, and we're curious to know that if you do work at a program, and that's kind of social service based, whatever the case is, have domestic violence, sexual assault related calls or requests increased, decreased, or held the same since 2020, May 2020 specifically?
Yeah, I would really love to know this in particular because I am on the crisis line at Women's Advocates most of the time. And we've actually seen a huge decrease in calls. Like, no one is calling us. Well, people are, but a lot less. And I wonder if that is a trend that some of you are also seeing, or if people are just going to other hotlines for help. See.
So the predominant selection on the poll has been increased. So
Yeah.
40% of us so far have reported that domestic violence and sexual assault calls to your program have increased since May 2020. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share those results.
Yeah, it looks like we've seen a pretty big increase for most folks, but I'm interested in that 25% of folks whose programs have seen a decrease in calls. I do want to know. I want to talk to some people a little more about why they think that might be, but we can do that another time.
Yeah, I see in the chat that people are saying fear is one of the fear and safety concerns.
Yeah.
Something we addressed early on too, where we realized there might not be a safe way to talk on the phone, and so we launched a live chat feature on our site to have another avenue for victim survivors to reach out without running the risk of being heard verbally. But again, there's also other safety risks to that too, if an abusive person monitors the phone or checks different devices or things too. So yeah, I'm seeing lack of, feeling concerned or uncomfortable about going to shelters because of COVID-19 and concerns about social distancing. So maybe not even because they don't know if that would be a viable option for them. Again, maybe the abusive person is always with them, so they don't even have a moment to step away and try to seek help. Okay, I'm seeing in the chat more people have reached out to the chat feature online.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I'm glad that we're all sort of increasing our options for people to get in contact, because they are, we know that it's not like domestic violence isn't happening anymore because of COVID. We know that it's happening more and more frequently. So I'm glad that we are all working on this together and figuring it out together.
Thank you for participating in that. And if you have anything else to share, I can continue to send it in the chat, but we're going to move forward with another opportunity for engagement. So getting into kind of the bulk of the presentation of social abuse, right? We're not going to be focusing, predominantly and only on the pandemic, but we do want to acknowledge that that is the reality of what we're experiencing right now too. So we have 3 different ways for you to kind of contribute. We're only going to do one word cloud, but we are interested to see this word cloud of what people are currently thinking about social abuse. So when you hear the term, the phrase, the words social abuse, what comes to mind? So you can click the link in the chat that I just sent out, and you can add up to 10 words that come to your mind, and we'll start to form a word cloud together. Or you have the option of using your phone to open up the camera and use a little fancy QR code, and then it'll bring up a link and you could click on that. Or if none of those are working, you can go to menti.com and use this code 1917784. So those are your 3 options, and I'm going to launch that so we can see what people are starting to say. And then this is on the screen too of what the code is, and then the link that you can click on is in the chat as well. So I'll give just a few moments here for people to contribute. Maybe once we get to maybe 50 people, we have 16 people who have submitted words so far. So the biggest one is isolation and loneliness.
And we are going to talk about those.
Our separation, fear. And so the thing about Menti is, as the words, the same word is being sent in by the attendees, the word gets bigger. So isolation has been sent in many, many times by you all, which is really great. It's not great that people are experiencing isolation, but it is something that is a part of social abuse. Some people are mentioning the internet and Facebook and the chat as well too. Lonely, trapped, alone, bullying, ashamed, depression, fear, Facebook, possessiveness, defamation, preventing connection, cut off from the community, gaslighting, low self-esteem, scene zoning. I'm not sure I know what that is. Hopeless, trapped, stalking, unjust, distanced, afraid, monitoring. Yeah. Unwanted. Teenagers. Yeah, trust issues, manipulation. So I'm really interested. Facebook is getting quite big, so I'm interested to know if people are associating like Facebook in terms of people are using that to, restricting access to Facebook, or, that's interesting to me. I can read these.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and continue from this, but thank you so much for sharing. You can continue to do so because I think it's important to think about these things. I also see racism, piercing, humiliation, manipulation, pressure, judgment. Yeah, burned bridges. Okay, it's not letting me exit. Okay. All right, well, thank you all so much for participating in that and building a word cloud with us. We're gonna kind of talk about this definition of social abuse. So it's defined as a pattern of behavior that aims to cut you off from your family, friends, or community. So this perpetrator may work to damage the victim survivor's interpersonal relationships through isolation or other means. So a lot of you kind of mentioned that in the word cloud of different tactics of how they can damage those relationships. And we often hear of, abusive people acting in a way that's really intolerable or makes it undesirable to be with, to hang out or spend time or communicate with or contact the victim survivor. And it's nothing against the victim survivor. It's just that the person who's abusive kind of deters them from wanting to do that. Or maybe there's a lot of different tactics of kind of damaging that relationship, or maybe even their public reputation. So I saw some people wrote about that too, like using social media to defame them or to, spread lies or different things with the intention of making it so the only person that the victim survivor can go to is the abusive person. And then that social abuse is one of those things that you don't have to be in person to perpetrate it, right? It's something that can happen in the home, but also in public spaces, but through the phone and online, which a lot of you mentioned digital means as a part of social abuse too, of, you know, texting other people or maybe even using their own phone and deleting voicemails or deleting calls from loved ones and, you know, leaving the victim survivor to think, oh, okay, well, maybe no one cares or people don't want to talk to me, or they're answering the phone and saying things that deters them from reaching out again or responding in text messages and deleting them. There's a lot of different ways to do that as well too. So that's a little bit about the definition of what constitutes as social abuse. And we're going to talk a little bit more about specific examples of that too in a moment here. But before we do want to show this video. It is from the Duluth model. And I know a lot of you are probably familiar with the power and control wheel, and we do want to highlight one aspect of that, which is isolation. So we're going to listen to this individual, Scott Miller, talk about isolation. So let me know if you can't hear it, but I'm going to go ahead and play it.
Isolation is another tactic on the power and control wheel. And when I listen to men talk about isolating their partners, there's a lot of ways that they talk about going about this particular tactic. The ultimate goal is to keep her from hearing voices other than his. So he's got this way he wants her to think. He's got this way he wants her to feel, things he wants her to do. If she comes in contact with members of her family, her friends, they'll have other ideas about what she should be doing. And he doesn't want those ideas in her head. He wants his ideas in her head. So he finds ways of isolating her. So it might be something as subtle as creating an argument every time she wants to go out and see her family or friends, so that it gets to the point where it's just so hard to even go out that I just quit. I'll just stay in because I don't need another argument. I don't need a bunch of yelling. I don't need something broken. I don't need to be threatened. I'll just stay home. I'll just submit to avoid the consequence. It could be something like checking her cell phone. So she doesn't have any privacy. So her Facebook account, her email, her phone, she has to give him all the passwords so that he can look and make sure she's not talking to anybody who he doesn't approve of. It could be something as severe as literally making her move away from friends and family, move into the country where there's only one vehicle and he's the one who uses it. So literally, not only is she socially isolated from her friends and family, but she's physically isolated, so she can't get to them when he's not around. He'll even take the phone with him so that she doesn't have a phone to even use to call when he's gone. All these things are this notion that if I can control how she thinks, then I can control her. And the more contact she has outside of me, the less likely I'm going to be able to maintain that control. One of the beliefs that drive isolation is that you're mine. You have to do what I want you to do because I own you. And it's interesting to talk to men about how they get this notion of ownership. Different men have different lines for it. So one guy might say it's when she got pregnant. Another guy might say it's when I got married to her. Another man might say it's when she moved away from her family with me. They all have this different line that now she's mine. But once she's mine, now I get to control how she thinks, how she feels, and how she acts. And the best way to do that is to isolate her from anybody but me.
So that video, and I do, of course, want to provide the caveat that the Duluth program, or the Duluth model and the Domestic Abuse Intervention Project in Duluth, that particular person does abuse intervention programs with men who batter or men who use abuse, right? And so this person is speaking from his own context of who he works with, and that dynamic is typically the man being the abusive person and the woman being the victim survivor, and that we know, and we included this video because a lot of those tactics, if you just delete the pronouns, applies to, you know, any of those dynamics of, you know, that these are all things that can be perpetrated by women and by gender nonconforming folks and in LGBTQ relationships and everything too, not just within this heterosexual dynamic. But I think the main points that he was making are really important and spoke to what people mentioned in the word cloud of this of isolation kind of being rooted in this violation of boundaries, violation of privacy, of not being able to have boundaries, of not being able to have autonomy, right? Not being able to have the ability to say, no, I don't want you to do this, or I'm going to go see my friends, or not feeling like they have that freedom to be able to make those choices for themselves. And so thinking of all of those tactics that Scott Miller just described and how that can show up in these different relationships in the home. And again, not even from people who are partners. These things can all be done by people you live with, by family members, even things like parents and children and things. So we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later, but and feel free to add anything that you think might have been missing from that video in the chat too, but we're gonna continue to talk about this further here. And we first wanna know, has anyone experienced, or have you encountered anyone who has experienced the isolation tactics that were described in the video? So we're curious to see how common those things might be in your own community and the circles that you interact with. So it can be within the context of work, professional life, or personal life as well too.
Yeah, we know that a lot of us get into the field because of personal experience or because of a family member's personal experience. So your encounters with isolated people don't have to just come from your work life or from the things you do at a DVSA program. This can be people you know in person, people you have been once in person. It's not just related to work.
All right, I'll give a few more seconds here. Okay, it looks like 75% of us are saying, yes, I know someone, I know or I've worked with someone who has experienced isolation tactics from an intimate partner. 11% are saying that they know someone who have experienced those isolation tactics from a family member. And then 7% saying unsure. So hopefully when we kind of talk about it a little bit more too, you'll have a better idea of what might fall under that category as well too. So thank you for participating in that. So on that note, I mentioned just a moment ago that you know, anyone can perpetrate that social abuse. So anyone on the screen here, boyfriends, girlfriends, sexual or romantic partners, spouses, former partners, caregivers. That's a really big one too that some people don't think about as in terms of paid support workers or caregivers if they kind of are dependent on them for their basic needs or for other needs. We've heard a lot of stories of, you know, not giving access to the phone or not giving access to communication services or devices. Parents, guardian, other family members, adult children. That's something that I have been contacted about more recently too, where children or parents are experiencing, whether that's isolation or manipulation or financial abuse or other things too from their adult children, and feeling really stuck and trapped because they love their children, they want to be there for them, but their behavior is something that is harming them, right? It can be other people that they live with or see often inside or outside of the home too. And so we want to emphasize that point at the bottom that, of course, no one has the right to harm or interfere with your relationship or reputation or anyone that you know as well too. So we're going to do another quick poll. I didn't realize we had them back to back, but for those of you who did say yes, 75% of us, who have experienced social abuse, what was the perpetrator's relationship to that person? So was the person who was causing that abuse or using those social abuse and isolation tactics, were they partners or ex-partners? Were they parents, adult children? So any of those that we kind of mentioned on the screen too. And there is a typo. I have not known of someone who has experienced social abuse. Okay, just delete the O at the end of that. Okay, so the majority, 93% so far, are saying parents or I cannot speak today. I really apologize. Partners or ex-partners. All right, thank you for participating in that. Right, now onto some warning signs.
Yes, these are warning signs for yourself in relationships, but also to look for in the people that you're working with and serving, for folks in your own life too. Not all of these are immediate indicators that abuse is happening. And some of these are just bad behaviors if you look at them isolated. But in context with other behaviors, some of these can be signs of abuse. So if somebody has friends who engage in abusive or misogynistic behavior and either encourages or doesn't challenge those, that could be a warning sign, because if they are not standing up for other women or other partners of their friends' partners, or saying to somebody, hey, that's wrong, there's a possibility that they could engage in that behavior themselves. Someone who gossips about you to others, if you're in a close relationship with this person and they are telling secrets and your business and embarrassing stories about you to other people, that could warn you, that could be a red flag. Someone who monitors your social media interactions. It might not be at the point yet where the person says, give me all your passwords. But it could be at the point where they are saying, oh, who are you talking to on there right now? Who's trying to get in touch with you right now? Someone who puts you down in front of others. If you are at a party when parties were a thing, and the person you come in with is making fun of you in front of you and in front of other people, that's a red flag, because that's not something that's normally done in the context of a loving relationship. Someone who refuses to socialize with your family or friends, who expresses no interest or active hostility at the idea of meeting your family or friends, or then when they do is just an absolute terror, and really difficult to deal with and have conversations with. Could be a warning sign that there is some abuse happening. We have some other warning signs in here as well. And also feel free to add in the chat if you've noticed, if there are warning signs of social abuse or of abusive behavior that we've left off this list. This is by no means all inclusive. Other warning signs are traits of possessiveness, someone who demands that you account for all of your time with social contacts. Where were you when you went out to do this? Who were you with? Oh, when you went to see this person, what did you talk about? I need to know everything. And another really important thing to consider is how much alone time you're allowed to have, or the client that you're working with who might be experiencing abuse is allowed to have. Is the person allowed to have private conversations with other people? Or is the potentially abusive person always in the room no matter what? Are you allowed privacy to talk to other people about the things that are happening with you? Are you allowed to have things that are just yours? That is a huge warning sign. The idea of not being allowed privacy or interior thought is huge, and goes in with the idea of abuse being a tactic of, or being a way to own a person. If you're not allowed your own thoughts, if you're not allowed something that is just for you, that is a red flag. And yes, in the chat, we're seeing jealousy when they're very jealous or seems jealous, continual calling to see where you are. Yes. Ordering for you in restaurants. Yeah, that used to be like a really gentle, personly thing to do, right? Now it's like, how dare you assume what I want to eat? Maybe I want some chips and not a salad. Yeah. Red flags. And one of those also is like Scott Miller said, moving you away from your support network. That on its own isn't necessarily abusive. People move all the time and are perfectly fine. But it is when that moving away is not a mutual decision, or when it is done in concert with other alienating and isolating behaviors, that it becomes a red flag. Because when you move someone away from supportive family and friends, you are setting the stage for more escalated or dangerous behavior.
Yeah, I was just gonna add to that. Oh, sorry, Marybeth.
No, I'm just loving the chat, what's going on
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah, I was gonna say there was a comment earlier about how social abuse can be one of those sneaky things that can seem really polite. It can be really covert in terms of, it's because I love you so much.
I just care about you. I'm worried about, I don't want you to be around people who are gonna make you feel bad. I'm the only one who gets to make you feel bad.
That part. Yeah. So I think that is something we talk about a lot, especially with even with the youth. I don't know why I said it like that. High schoolers, and a lot of people are mentioning this in the chat, of how social abuse is intertwined with so many other things too, with that possession, with jealousy. And sometimes these things can be framed in a love bombing way of like, oh, are you sure you need to go see your parents or your family or your friends? Why don't we stay in and like do something really romantic? And that happens every single weekend. And then that person kind of realizes, wow, it's been months since I've seen another person. And again, on its own, that can be a honeymoon phase. That can be something very healthy, very cute. But if it's done in the name of trying to keep that other person away from their social support, there's a question too about what telling secrets that you hope to keep a secret, was that part of social abuse? And I think a lot of it goes to the intention and what is the impact of that. Are they doing it in the name of, you told me, you trusted me with this information, and I know it will strain your relationship with other people, which is good for me because I'm trying to control you and isolate you? Then I would say that yes, that would be considered social abuse and a part of a bigger system of trust. If you're curious and you like Brené Brown, she talks about the anatomy of trust, of being braving, and the V stands for vault, and that kind of speaks to that too, of like, what is yours to share and what is your intention of sharing personal information that might have a way of being detrimental to those relationships and to social support. So I think that those are really important things to talk about too, of how you act in public, of making decisions for you and not allowing you to speak for yourself, telling you what you have to wear, maybe criticizing how you act in a public and social setting, and making it so that you feel belittled or have a low self-esteem, things like that. Can threatening to out someone be considered social abuse?
Yes. I assume that you are asking outing somebody's status as trans or gay by another form of queer. And Yes, that is often a tactic that's used in LGBTQ plus relationships rather than heterosexual relationships, unless somebody's dealing with some gender identity struggles. Um, the threat to out someone and to damage their relationships with family that they're not out to yet is a really common tactic, actually. And yeah, since it does affect your relationships with the social circle, I would say social abuse, absolutely.
Right. Even if they don't actually out you and they use it as a threat, they
Just
that
the threat is enough.
the control and coercive thing, or they try to mask it of like, I'm the only one who knows this about you, and like, trying to say no one else will accept you and trying to keep that person in there because of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's important. Okay, I want to make sure we have time for things, so I'm going to move on, but I really love the engagement in the chat.
Yes, keep it up, please. So those were warning signs, and now we're going into examples of social abuse. People who use social abuse tactics often have sort of a mental approved and unapproved list of people that it is okay for you to communicate with and people that under no circumstances is it okay to communicate with. So someone using social abuse might stop you from seeing people that they have decided are not okay. And usually those are the people that are the most supportive and the most encouraging of a victim survivor's autonomy and personal choice and safety. So they'll stop you from seeing the people who could actually be very helpful to you in this moment. Restricting your time outside the home. There are a lot of survivors who have not been allowed to go outside, haven't even been allowed to go outside of their room, maybe. Another example would be forbidding someone from participating in social and community activities. If you're never allowed to go to a group meeting or a group event, your relationship with that group is going to disintegrate. Someone who shares private photos or videos of you online without permission, that is an example of social abuse. Revenge porn is a form of social abuse. It is sort of reputation tanking on a giant worldwide internet scale. That doesn't just do harm to somebody's relationships with the people they know, it also does harm to the person's online presence. And in that same vein, using social media to spread lies or damaging information. Yes, Tiffany, there is I don't understand why this is a thing, but there are a lot of people who make fake social media pages for other people and then use them for evil, basically. And that is, I don't know what the appeal of that is, but it is really common. Lying to friends and family, telling lies that could be damaging or relationship destroying. Another example of social abuse is sabotage. If the person makes a survivor miss or be late for important events or appointments or job interviews, oh my gosh, making a big fuss about I lost the keys or you lost the keys, or creating some sort of elaborate way to make someone miss an important event, or restricting access to transportation. An abuser might take the person's car keys or their bus pass or confiscate their mobility aids like their wheelchair or their cane because they know that without those things, they can't get around. They are dependent on the abusive person without those things.
Right, even like starting a fight before they leave for an event or intentionally going, or
right. like Scott Miller said, starting a fight every time you leave the house so that eventually you just stop leaving the house because you don't want to have a fight. It's really innocuous. It's a very sneaky way of abusing someone, because you're not telling them outright, no, you can't go to this thing. When you tell them that what they're doing is abusive, they'll say, well, I never told you you couldn't go out and see your friends. But they just made it so hard and so emotionally costly to go out and see friends that you've decided it's not even worth it. It's spirit breaking.
So people have already been doing this, so you're ahead of the curve in terms of that of examples. But if you think of more, we invite you to send them in the chat.
Yeah. And so there's a question of why social abuse, why use this to gain power and control over people. And it's because isolation is a way to enforce ownership. People who use abuse, particularly men who engage in violent abuse towards female partners, it is done because they want to, or believe they should, have the right to own the person they are in relationship with. And isolation is a way of increasing that ownership, or of emphasizing that ownership, by alienating victims from those supportive relationships. Abusers are making sure that the abuser's voice is the loudest one, is the only one that a victim survivor hears. And that's the thing. Abusers want to keep their victims from having independent thoughts and independent feelings, from having interiority. Isolation and social abuse keeps the abused person unaware that help exists, or if they're aware that help exists, keeps them unable to reach out for help. And the isolation of only being around an abusive person who is only telling you the negative things about yourself and only saying just like the worst stuff, creates a negative feedback loop for a victim survivor. If the only things you're hearing about yourself are that you're worthless, that nobody cares about you, that nobody will ever love you, if those are the only thoughts that you're hearing or that you're exposed to, eventually you're going to start to internalize and believe them. So a lot of survivors of abuse that includes isolation have a very low self-image, because the only things they hear about themselves are the ways in which they lack. So victim survivors need information that challenges the abuser's voice. They need to hear that they are good people, that people appreciate them, that they are missed, that they are loved and cared for. We need to interrupt that feedback loop, interrupt the abuser's voice, and say, hey, you're not just what the abuser tells you you are. You are your own person. You can do your own things, and you can be part of a community that doesn't involve this person. And then we said we were going to talk about COVID and social abuse, and so here we are. Abusers have been really tricky lately with COVID. They've been using the risks of COVID-19 transmission as an excuse to keep victim survivors isolated, to keep victim survivors away from the supportive people, but also to keep parents away from children. In custody situations where there's split custody, people might keep a parent away from the child and say, oh, it's not safe for you to see your kid because of COVID, or it's not safe for us to go and see dad because of COVID, even though like you can take precautions and things will be fine. We have a couple people with some raised hands in the participant list. If you could just put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A, we will answer them as best we can. Other ways to weaponize COVID for social abuse is to deny vaccine information or access. Because in the abuser's mind, once you're vaccinated, you might feel ready to leave. You might feel like you're okay and safe to go. They could be blocking access to reliable information. If the abusive person has opinions that differ from public health or CDC guidance, the victim survivor might not be receiving CDC approved information. And there's also the threat of financial devastation. The abuser might use the threat of, well, things are really hard right now. Do you think you're going to get a job? Do you think you're going to be able to support yourself if you leave? And that really, that has a big effect, a big weight on victim survivors' decision to leave or not. But there's a difference between being isolated because of the pandemic and being isolated because of abuse. So we are looking here at a chart that sort of discusses or like shows some different statements that refer to isolation. Some of them are based on the pandemic and some of them are abusive. So if someone is telling you, if someone that you live with is telling you, I'd prefer if we limit our contact with others and make sure we use masks and social distancing for our health, that's an isolation. That's like, we're going to be isolated and it's because of COVID. But if somebody is telling you, don't make plans with other people ever, you can't see anyone outside of this house because it's not safe, that's using COVID to isolate and to abuse. The very black and white, all or nothing language of the social abuse isolation side of the don't ever make plans, don't see anyone, is very different from the pandemic isolation. That is, we should limit our contacts, but the people we should see, but the people we want to see, we should see with these precautions. Those are different. The idea of if somebody's saying like, I really miss the people in my life, saying you've been talking a lot about missing your mom, maybe we should FaceTime her. That's an acknowledgement that you're experiencing isolation and loneliness and offering to help fix it, providing options to help you make that isolation easier. In social abuse, somebody's saying, show me your phone, I need to know who you're talking to, or no, you can't talk to this person ever. There's not, in social abuse, the abusive person is actually increasing the sense of isolation. Whereas during the pandemic, somebody who's not abusive might be saying, okay, well, we can't see these people in person, but let's make it easier on you. Let's make it easier on us. There's a problem solving involved. Like I understand that you're lonely and I'm really sad that you're lonely. We can still do things, but we have to be careful about them, versus the social abuse aspect that is, no, you're staying here, you're staying with me. I'm in charge of you. We see that with the don't forget your mask versus you're supposed to stay at home. Let's see. Yeah, Tiffany, the reason why abusers behave the way they do is because they realize their partners are strong and smart, and abusing them will keep their partner with them. Yes, the whole idea behind isolation is, and social abuse is shutting down the victim survivor's own sense of strength and empowerment, chipping away at that so they the victim survivor doesn't think that they're good enough to not be abused, even though like nobody deserves it. Yeah, so that's just some of the difference. That's that's a little bit of the difference between the isolation caused by the pandemic, which has an end point and is a little more fluid and forgiving, versus social abuse isolation, which is very controlling, has no room for growth or for joy or for anybody who's not the abuser. Oh, and yeah, feel free to keep in the chat, keep putting in the chat other things that sound like social abuse or what social abuse isolation sounds like to you. Keep adding examples as well. We're doing great with that. So glad everybody is so active in the chat.
So we mentioned this a bit before, but in terms of impacts of social abuse, right? And so these are things that can continue, and that can be things immediately within the relationship as they're experiencing it. So things like maybe having fewer options, like if they do decide that leaving is the best choice for them, because the abusive person may have, diminished those relationships with parents or friends or other family members. They might not have someone to stay with while they try to figure things out because those relationships have been so impacted. Maybe another impact could be having to navigate all of those different systems, legal, shelter systems, and things without the support that they maybe would have had if that social abuse hadn't happened. Again, a lot of things of just being alone, right? Of just having this sense of I am alone and no one is there for me. I have to process all of these things by myself, or maybe not at all, right? And we know that trauma impacts our bodies and impacts our brain and impacts our holistic health. So that can kind of have further impacts on us too, if we're not having that support. And then too, if children are involved, maybe they are exposed to that, or they're directly, being told or experiencing it themselves too, that they'll feel the effects of social abuse as well too. And that, thinking back to when we were in high school, middle school, like our social support, that's our world, our friends, our everything, what they think and how they feel about us and our connection to them is a lot, is very important. And so I know that even with the pandemic itself, there's already a strain, but in the presence of social abuse too, then that can exacerbate things even more too. And then again, internalizing a lot of those thoughts of like, what do people learn when they're experiencing social abuse? Even if they're out of that abusive situation, they may carry those core beliefs with them, that they're alone, that no one cares about them, or what's the point of wanting better for myself if no one cares? Or maybe I should be grateful that I always have someone, even though even though they're hurtful and harmful. Or maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm broken and that's why everyone hates me. So that, and then just loneliness. We're going to get into that in a moment here too, but loneliness is a really huge impact of feeling of that encompassing, all-consuming feeling of just being so lonely and feeling helpless, right? People are saying in the chat that, and stalking too, and that fear, that can be an impact of social abuse too, of being followed or being constantly monitored or harassed or threatened. That can be further impacts too, even after the relationship might be over. So we are curious in terms of tying things back to potentially your workplace, and we do realize that not all of you work within a domestic violence shelter setting, which is more than okay. But we are curious if you do have if you do work with victim survivors of domestic violence, does your organization have programming that specifically addresses loneliness among survivors? And again, you don't have to answer the poll if it doesn't apply to you. We're just curious.
And there is a part that says loneliness is secondary to what we're addressing. And Yeah, for our program, I think so much, it's so easy to see, it's so easy to think that the only issue or the most pressing issue with survivors is safe housing and legal help. And yes, those things are so important. Um, but it's also really important to remember the internal, what is going on inside while this person is trying to seek safe shelter. Um, we have to be holistic in the way that we are approaching domestic violence.
Absolutely. And we're seeing that 49% are saying they have support through support groups, 33% are saying they have mental health therapy, and 36% said that loneliness is secondary to what they're addressing, which we know with COVID, it's an added layer of, maybe your organization had a really incredible living room where everyone would gather, or just other spaces that are now, people don't feel as comfortable being in because they're worried about transmission and infection and things too. So that's definitely something to take into consideration. So thank you for participating in that. So speaking a little bit more on loneliness, there's this really incredible article that was written by a leader in the domestic violence field, and I'm not seeing a source on this, so I'll make sure I'll add the source to this slide so you can read that, and I'll include it in the follow-up email too if you want to read that paper article. And it talks about these different dimensions of loneliness. And so again, these don't have to, loneliness can be caused by a lot of different things. And so if you identify with any of these, again, it doesn't automatically mean that that person is experiencing social abuse. It can just be loneliness as a result of, living alone and, maybe having family in another country or not being able to visit them. They're in another state, whatever the case is. There's these dimensions of intimate, right? So maybe they have this perceived absence of very close friends and family who affirm our value and sense that we matter. So when I was kind of learning about this concept of how to think about loneliness, these are also points of connection, right? Things that we really might rely on to feel supported and to not feel lonely and to feel like people are there for us and that we are valued and that we matter and that we're cared for. And so that might be that intimate circle, very close level circle of people who affirm, right, that we matter and that we are valued. And we might have an absence of that in our life, and that can cause us to feel lonely. And then there might be a bigger circle of, relational, so they might have this absence of people we might see regularly, and I hear this a lot of at work. They're experiencing a lot of relational loneliness. People, like, they're used to being surrounded by other advocates or by other coworkers or other people that they see regularly, and they feel that companionship and that support and solidarity with each other, and that might be missing if everyone's working from home, or you'll see them a lot less than you used to. That might contribute to that dimension of loneliness. And then this other is collective, so this perceived absence of valued social roles that make us feel part of something greater than ourselves too. So that might be even beyond, what we do for work, or maybe it is related to the work that we do, rather than like the people that we are engaging with in that work context. And so I think applying these dimensions, I think a lot of people might have been able to relate to these different dimensions at various times throughout the pandemic, and then kind of tailoring out specifically to domestic violence victim survivors. They might be feeling all of these all at once. All of these different dimensions are things that are being targeted by the abusive person. And so that is something too where just thinking about what the impact of that can be, of experiencing all those different dimensions and what messages that person starts to learn. And I think that's what researchers are going to be really interested in, studying a lot of things about the implications of this pandemic. But I think that's one too, of what does that mean for domestic violence survivors for going such an extended period of time with all of these different dimensions of loneliness. So we're curious if you have engaged with people who might be experiencing social abuse and loneliness during this time. So it could be either or. You can talk about, if you do want a space to talk about loneliness in your own life, or maybe loneliness that your kids might be feeling just because they're not seeing their friends as much. They can't, run around outside and play with them or do things that kids do. in the same way as they might have been used to before. So we're just curious to know if anyone has anything to say or share about that.
And I think, like you said, Brennison, there's so much room now because of all of the pandemic related isolation that we've experienced as like on a societal level. There's so much room now for those of us who haven't been in abusive relationships to have greater empathy or greater sympathy for people who have been experiencing social abuse. It is, now that we have at least a little taste of what it is like to be alone or to be isolated, I would hope that we're all more equipped to extend some love and support and understanding to victim survivors who are experiencing this on a much more intense scale than we are. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. In the chat, it is so hard to do this work alone. And a lot of folks do just want to, who are calling the hotlines, do just like want somebody to talk to. While we had split up our shelter operations, because of COVID, I was working alone on the crisis line, and I was one of maybe 4 people in the building. And when we all came back to work into the building, I realized how quiet it had been when everybody was gone. Just like hearing somebody, my coworkers' keyboards clicking in the other room was a sound that I hadn't heard in 9 months. And I thought, oh my God, people go their whole lives like this. People are isolated like this all the time. And I felt like I was going a little bit nuts just for a couple of months of that. And I wasn't experiencing nearly the trauma that other folks were.
Yeah, I'm seeing in the chat in terms of how have you engaged with people who's experiencing this. People are saying, listening to their story, validating them, encouraging them, letting them know they're worthy of healthy relationships, offering different ways to talk, connecting with them in whatever ways they feel comfortable, right? Encouraging them to talk and helping them to feel heard, right? There's even examples in the chat I'm seeing of going to help a friend who has 2 twin boys and have suffered from the effects of social abuse and maybe never being on a play date ever since age 5, and now getting some support from YWCA and helping that experience too, of like just developmentally from a children perspective too, of oftentimes if children are involved, if there's social abuse on a parent, on a partner, the children are often, having that maybe not as closely monitored, but are kind of limited to that as well too.
Oh, I think this concept of arranging to meet victim survivors at places that the abuser's already given them permission to go to, like a grocery store. Do you, the person who put that in the chat, do you like go out and meet victim survivors at grocery stores when they're doing their groceries? Because that is so creative, and I'm sure really, really helpful. That sounds great. And feel free, we're gonna talk more about creative ways to reach out to people. So if you do have techniques that you use or that your program uses to engage with people who are isolated, please put them in the chat. I love to hear stuff like that. And yeah, our phone calls that we do have are getting a lot longer because people just need to talk.
Absolutely. So in terms of connection being the antidote, right? So we've talked a lot about how difficult it is and how prevalent it is, but there's also an opportunity, right, for this connection. And social connectedness is defined in this article by the extent to which one has a meaningful place in constructive relationships with other individuals, groups or society indicated by feelings of caring about others and feeling cared about by others, such as love, companionship, or affection, and feelings of belonging to a group or community. So keeping those kind of two facets in mind too of, is there a suggestion of, yeah, maybe let's talk every week. Can we connect, every Monday at this time? And maybe that predictability is helpful for someone who's abusive, like, okay, whatever, you're just talking to this person, I'm not worried, it's a consistent thing, but you're able to have that point of connection. Maybe even online chat groups. I know that's something that a lot of people have been leaning on to lately. So I included a link to that in the later slides. But feeling a sense of belonging to a group or community. Maybe I know book clubs have been really rampant during this time too. Of, is there a new hobby that I can try, a new thing? While being safe within my own personal parameters of what that means to me. Just having that connection to can be really important, and especially for someone who has experienced social abuse. So more about kind of reaching out, right? So people in the chat already mentioned that loneliness can prevent survivors from asking for help. Maybe if the person feels ashamed or they feel um, embarrassed by what they're experiencing, or they don't want to be judged, or they think that they're going to get blamed because their abuser blames them for everything. So why would anyone else not blame them? So that can really compound their loneliness too. And so there's studies that have shown that people who are lonely often feel, right, that shame that they can't reach out, or that builds on partner imposed isolation. And so it might make it hard to re-engage with others because they might have the fear of things, the abusive person's words are replaying in their head every time they try to talk to someone, of like, oh, you have a really ugly laugh, or, oh, just things that make you feel really uncomfortable or insecure about your ability to have friends or your ability to have meaningful connections with other people. And so that can make it really difficult too. And so a lot of people have mentioned this in the chat of reaching out, right? Of like, how can I support, maybe offering different things, giving them different choices. Again, thinking about that trauma-informed approach of safety, trust, collaboration, choice, and empowerment to how can you, lean on all of those different components. And so we do have some examples of what that might sound like.
Yeah, reaching out is so important. And as if we know and love someone who's being abused, it's not, we want to make it as easy as possible for them to seek help. So we want to be the ones reaching out, right? But just saying, how are you? How's it going? Isn't always the way to do that. It can be really hard to respond to the question, how are you, over and over, because it's like nothing new has happened in my life in the past year. I am the same as I have always been, and what I am is having a hard time. So these are examples of things that you can say in a call or a text, an email, a direct message that lets the people in your life know that you care about them without explicitly stating that. And also without asking them to do any of the heavy lifting. So you can say, I made way too much soup last night. Can I drop some off? Reach out for connection in that way. That gives you time to maybe see the person's face and do like a very brief check-in to see, oh, they're all right. They don't have any bruises or anything. And you also know that they're going to eat dinner because they have soup. You can say, have you read this book, or have you seen this movie? It reminded me of you. I'm stopping by Walgreens on my way home. Is there anything I can grab for you while I'm there? Send them a meme that made you laugh. Talking with a victim survivor doesn't have to be all, when are you leaving? Are you safe? Are you okay? It can just be like, you deserve a laugh too, and here's something that made me laugh. Victim survivors live in difficulty, like live in sadness. And so the more you can extend the opportunity for them to feel joy and feel laughter and know that there are more things in life, they deserve to laugh too, super helpful. Saying like, you have this skill that I don't. Like the last time we talked, you knew so much about houseplants and like I don't. Please help me with this orchid. Please help me with this dying plant. That stuff like that allows the victim survivor to know that they're good at something, that they have a talent that other people might ask them for. Yeah, these are all just ways to reach out without saying I'm reaching out because I'm worried. They're just ways that also maintain social connectedness. Oh, saying, are you still at this mailing address and should I send and can I send a card? Super helpful as well. People have been really into snail mail lately, so that might not seem as weird or trip an abuser's alarms the way that it might under normal circumstances. Reaching out through the mail is always really nice. So how to support somebody who's experiencing social abuse, or how to reach out to someone experiencing social abuse. When you go into it, you got to be really clear on what your goal is. If your goal in reaching out is to try to convince this person to leave their relationship, take a step back, reevaluate, find a new goal, and then reach out. Victim survivors of social abuse and of domestic violence are getting enough stress and enough pressure in their lives to leave without you adding your 2 cents to the mix. So don't try to convince them to leave. Don't judge them for not having left yet. Just say, like, I'm here for you. I think you're a really funny person. I admire your taste in art. I want to talk to you about books. You're offering support, and you're also rebuilding their sense of themselves as a person who is more than a victim, who is more than a survivor, you're building up their sense of being a full human being again, in a way that abuse and isolation has stripped away. When you are supporting someone who's being abused, you have to be really creative in how you reach out, because we know people who use abuse are also very creative and often monitor or prevent victims from being in conversation or contact with other people. So if you do have any creative avenues to reach out to someone, please put it in the chat. I am still struck by the idea of meeting a survivor at a grocery store to have a conversation while they're shopping in the canned goods aisle. That is super creative, and I just want to praise that one more time. So please keep putting creative ways to reach out in the chat. But also, if it's been a while since you've contacted this person, or since this person has contacted you, reach out anyway. It's never too late to get in touch with somebody that you're concerned about or that you want to get back in touch with. Like Brennison mentioned, people who are experiencing loneliness often feel really ashamed at how withdrawn they've become. And that shame makes it harder to reach out, because they're worried someone will say, well, why haven't you called me? It's been 2 years. Why haven't you called me? And so they just won't reach out because they're afraid of that reaction. So if it's been a while and somebody that you haven't spoken to in years or months is suddenly reaching out to you, just express some thanks that they're able to do that at all. And if you haven't reached out to somebody in a very long time, don't wait. Please do. And yeah, just saying, I just wanted to hear your voice is really nice. That is important for people to hear, that somebody else wants to hear from them. Yeah, I've started a walking program. Do you want to join me? Yeah. I love this. yeah, please keep up the creative avenues. But yeah, when you're supporting somebody, don't judge, just offer support, enforce their existence as a full human being with a wide variety of interests and experiences that don't involve being abused. Get creative with it, but do reach out.
This is something I've been trying to sneak into as many webinars as possible because I really, really resonate with this model of routes to safety. It was created by someone who has a master's in social work named Jake, I believe, and talks about these different routes and thinking of it as the new love languages, right? Of with all those love languages too, if you haven't heard of that, you can look it up. But in terms of like, oh, I feel loved through gifts, physical touch, quality time, acts of service, words of affirmation, like those are all things that people might like to experience, but there might be some predominant ones that really help them feel loved. And so applying that same kind of mentality to routes to safety of these different routes of inner guidance, sensory experiences, private retreat, quality relationships, all of those different things. They might gravitate to some more than others, and that can help them feel really safe, or help them feel moments of safety depending on their situation, right? So there's different examples here. And so those are different things that you can mention with your clients, with your friends, with your family of like, yeah, how do you feel safe? And thinking of, when's the last time I asked that to a friend or someone that I love, regardless of if they're in an unsafe relationship or not. Knowing those things can be really helpful for helping to breed that connection and a deeper sense of connection as well too. So I encourage you to look at that further. There's a link on the slide you can click on if you want to learn more about that. But that's something that might be really helpful during these times. And then here are some other resources to explore. So yeah, there's some more kind of tying these two things together in terms of the pandemic and social abuse, and also loneliness, and online support or chat groups as well too have been linked to this slide. So if you know of any other resources that you think would be helpful for us to include in the follow-up email, feel free to send those to me soon. But we do again want to say we have our live chat. Please reach out if you have a question. You don't have to be in crisis. It can be for on behalf of another person. Maybe you do reach out to someone and realize that they are experiencing abuse and you just want some more information about the resources. We're here to help out with that. It's on our website. You click this button. This is live chat now. And then we also have a lot of other resources. So if you are looking for crisis cards or things to just kind of hand that are small, we have those. You can print them off of our website, or you can request for them to be mailed to you. So there's a lot of different options for that too. So feel free to reach out. We'll include our email at the end here if you do have any specific things, but all of these trifolds are available to you to print, to request. We would love for you to use them. And please stay connected with us. Speaking of connection, we are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Follow us on all of those things if you would like. You can take a picture of this. It has all of our 24-hour crisis resource line as well too. And then our emails, outreach at wadvocates.org, and also resources at wadvocates.org too. So we would love to hear from you about what you thought of this webinar. So when you close out of the webinar, it automatically should pop up this survey. If it doesn't, I sent it in the chat. If you didn't get it, you'll receive it in an email in just a few hours. So we'd love to hear from you if you like this format, if there's enough engagement with you all. We want to know what other topics you're interested in having webinars about. We really appreciate you all being here. And information about the certificates of attendance, I'm going to send that in the chat, but again, it will be in the follow-up email. We already have your emails because you are here and you registered, so we have that, no worries. But I'll hang around for just like a minute more if anyone has any other questions, but thank you so much for being here, seeing a lot of gratitude in the chat, receiving it.
Thank you all so much. Again, yeah, just send us an email if you want certificates. Please fill out the survey. We look at the surveys and we tailor our webinars to the survey responses. So anything you want to say, we will read it. And yes, the